Dr. Mark Zuckerberg.
I love this place. Thank you all for coming out in the rain, the pouring rain. We're going to make this worth it for you. President Faust, Board of Overseers, faculty, friends, alumni, proud parents, members of the ad board, and graduates of the greatest university in the world. I am honored to be here with you today because, let's face it, you accomplished something I never could. If I get through this speech today, it'll be the first time I actually finish something here at Harvard. Class of 2017, congratulations. Now, I'm an unlikely speaker today, not just because I dropped out, but because we're technically in the same generation. We walked this yard less than a decade apart. We studied the same ideas and slept through the same Act 10 lectures. We may have taken different roads to get here, especially if you came all the way from the quad. But today, I want to share what I've learned about our generation and the world we're all building together. But first, these last couple of days have brought back a lot of good memories. How many of you remember exactly where you were and what you were doing when you got that email telling you got into Harvard? I was playing the video game Civilization, and I ran downstairs and got my dad, and for some reason, his first reaction was to video me opening the email. That could have been a really, really sad video. But I swear, getting into Harvard is the thing my parents are most proud of me for. My mom is nodding. You all know what I'm talking about. Look, guys, it's tough to beat this. You'll see when you get out there. How many of you remember your first lecture here at Harvard? Mine was Computer Science 121 with the incredible Harry Lewis. Harry. I was running late for class, so I threw on a t-shirt, and I didn't realize until afterwards that I put it on inside out and backwards and my tag was sticking out the front. I couldn't figure out why no one in class would talk to me. Except for this one guy, KX Jin. He just went with it. We started doing our problem sets together, and now he runs a big part of Facebook. And that, class of 2017, is why you should be nice to people. But my best memory from Harvard is meeting Priscilla. I had just launched this prank website, FaceMash, and the ad board wanted to see me. Everyone thought I was going to get kicked out. My parents drove up here to help me pack my stuff. My friends threw me a going away party. Who does that? As luck would have it, Priscilla was at that party with her friends, and we met in line for the bathroom in the Foho Bell Tower, and in what must be one of the all-time most romantic lines, I turned to her and said, "I'm getting kicked out in 3 days, so we need to go on a date quickly." Actually, any of you graduating today can use that line. "I'm getting kicked out today. We need to go on a date fast." I didn't end up getting kicked out. I did that to myself. Priscilla and I started dating, and, you know, that movie made it seem like FaceMash was so important to starting Facebook. It wasn't. But without FaceMash, I never would have met Priscilla. And Priscilla's the most important person in my life. so you could still say it was the most important thing I built in my time here. We have all started lifelong friendships here, and some of us even families. That's why I'm so grateful to this place. Thanks, Harvard. Today, I want to talk about purpose. But I'm not here to give you the standard commencement about finding your purpose. We're millennials. We try to do that instinctively. Instead, I'm here to tell you that finding your purpose isn't enough. The challenge for our generation is to create a world where everyone has a sense of purpose. One of my favorite stories is when JFK went to go visit the NASA Space Center, and he saw a janitor holding a broom, and he asked him what he was doing, and the janitor replied, "Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon." Purpose is that feeling that you are a part of something bigger than yourself, that you are needed, and that you have something better ahead to work for. Purpose is what creates true happiness. And you are graduating at a time when this is especially important. When our parents graduated, that sense of purpose reliably came from your job, your church, your community. But today, technology and automation are eliminating many jobs. Membership in a lot of communities has been declining, and a lot of people are feeling disconnected and depressed and are trying to fill a void in their lives. As I've traveled around, I've sat with children in juvenile detention and opioid addicts who told me that maybe their lives would have turned out differently if they just had something to do, an after-school program or somewhere to go. I've met factory workers who know their old jobs aren't coming back and are just trying to find their path ahead. For our society to keep moving forward, we have a generational challenge to not only create new jobs, but create a renewed sense of purpose. I remember that night I launched Facebook from that little dorm in Kirkland House. I went to Noakes with my friend KX, and I remember telling him clearly that I was excited to help connect the Harvard community, but one day someone would connect the whole world. The thing is, it never even occurred to me that that someone might be us. We were just college kids. We didn't know anything about that. There were all these great big technology companies with all these resources, and I just assumed one of them would do it. But this idea was so clear to us that all people want to connect. So we just kept working on it, day after day after day. And I know that a lot of you are going to have your own stories just like this. A change in the world that seems so clear that you are sure someone else is going to do it. But they're not. You will. But it's not enough to have that purpose yourself. You also have to create a sense of purpose for others. And I found that out the hard way. You see, my hope was never to build a company. I wanted to have an impact. And as all these people started joining us, I just assumed that that's what they wanted to do too. So I never took the time to explain what it was that I hoped we'd build. A couple of years in, some big companies wanted to buy us. I didn't want to sell. I wanted to see if we could connect more people. And we were building the first version of Newsfeed at the time, and I thought, if we could just launch this, it could change how we all learn about the world. Nearly everyone else wanted to sell. Without a sense of higher purpose, this was their startup dream come true, and it tore our company apart. After one particularly tense argument, one of my close advisors told me if I didn't agree to sell the company right now, I would regret that decision for the rest of my life. Relationships were so frayed that within a year or so, every single person on our management team was gone. That was my hardest time leading Facebook. I believed in what we were doing, but I felt alone. And worse, it was my fault. I wondered if I was just wrong, an imposter, a 22-year-old kid who had no idea how things actually worked. Now, years later, I understand that is how things work when there's no sense of higher purpose. So it's up to all of us to create it so we can all keep moving forward together. And today, I want to talk about 3 ways that we can create a world where everyone has a sense of purpose. By taking on big, meaningful projects together. By redefining equality so everyone has the freedom to pursue their purpose. And by building community all across the world. So first, let's take on big, meaningful projects. Our generation is going to have to deal with tens of millions of jobs replaced by automation like self-driving cars and trucks. But we have the potential to do so much more than that. Every generation has its defining works. More than 300,000 people worked to put that man on the moon, including that janitor. Millions of volunteers immunized children around the world against polio, and millions of more people built the Hoover Dam and other great projects. And now it's our generation's turn to do great things. Now I know, maybe you're thinking, I don't know how to build a dam. I don't know how to get 1 million people involved in anything. Well, let me tell you a secret. No one does when they begin. Ideas don't come out fully formed. They only become clear as you work on them. You just have to get started. If I had to know everything about connecting people before I got started, I never would have built Facebook. Movies and pop culture just get this all wrong. The idea of a single eureka moment is a dangerous lie. It makes us feel inadequate because we feel like we haven't had ours yet. And it prevents people with seeds of good ideas from ever getting started in the first place. Oh, and you know what else movies get wrong about innovation? No one writes math formulas on glass, okay? All right, that's not a thing, okay? It's really good to be idealistic, but be prepared to be misunderstood. Anyone working on a big vision is going to get called crazy, even if you end up right. Anyone taking on a complex problem is going to get blamed for not fully understanding it, even though it's impossible to know everything up front. Anyone taking initiative will always get criticized for moving too fast because there's always someone who wants to slow you down. In our society, we often don't take on big things because we're so afraid of making mistakes that we ignore all the things wrong today if we do nothing. The reality is, anything we do today is going to have some issues in the future. But that can't stop us from getting started. So what are we waiting for? It is time for our generation-defining great works. How about stopping climate change before we destroy the planet and getting millions of people involved, manufacturing and installing solar panels? How about curing all diseases and getting people involved by asking volunteers to share their health data, track their health data, and share their genomes? You know, today, our society spends more than 50 times as much treating people who are sick as we invest in finding cures so people don't get sick in the first place. It makes no sense. We can fix this. How about modernizing democracy so everyone can vote online? And how about personalizing education so everyone can learn? These achievements are all within our reach. Let's do them all in a way that gives everyone in our society a role. Let's do big things, not just to create progress, but to create purpose. So taking on big, meaningful projects together is the first thing we can do to create a world where everyone has a sense of purpose. The second is redefining our idea of equality so everyone has the freedom to pursue their purpose. Now, many of our parents had stable jobs throughout their careers, but in our generation, we're all a little entrepreneurial, whether we're starting our own projects or finding our role in another one. And, that's great, because our culture of entrepreneurship is how we create so much progress. An entrepreneurial culture thrives when it is easy to try lots of new ideas. Facebook wasn't the first thing I built. I also built chat systems and games, study tools and music players, and I'm not alone. J.K. Rowling got rejected 12 times before she finally wrote and published Harry Potter. Even Beyoncé had to make hundreds of songs to get Halo. The greatest successes come from having the freedom to fail. Now, today, we have a level of wealth inequality that hurts everyone. When you don't have the freedom to take your idea and turn it into a historic enterprise, we all lose. And right now, today, our society is way over-indexed on rewarding people when they're successful, and we don't do nearly enough to make sure that everyone can take lots of different shots. Now let's face it, there is something wrong with our system when I can leave here and make billions of dollars in 10 years, while millions of students can't even afford to pay off their loans, let alone start a business. Look, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, and I don't know a single person who gave up on starting a business because they were worried they might not make enough money. But I know too many people who haven't had the chance to pursue their dreams because they didn't have a cushion to fall back on if they failed. We all know you don't get successful just by having a good idea or working hard. You get successful by being lucky too. If I had to support my family growing up instead of having the time to learn how to code, if I didn't know that I was going to be fine if Facebook didn't work out, then I wouldn't be standing up here today. And if we're honest, we all know how much luck we've had to get to this point in our lives. Every generation expands its definition of equality. Previous generations fought for the vote and civil rights. They had the New Deal and Great Society. And now it's time for our generation to define a new social contract. We should have a society that measures progress not just by economic metrics like GDP, but by how many of us have a role we find meaningful. We should explore ideas like universal basic income to make sure that everyone has a cushion to try new ideas. We're all going to change jobs and roles many times, so we need affordable childcare to get to work and healthcare that's not tied to just one employer. And we're all going to make mistakes. So we need a society that's less focused on locking us up and stigmatizing us when we do. And as our technology keeps on evolving, we need a society that is more focused on providing continuous education through our lives. And yes, giving everyone the freedom to pursue purpose isn't going to be free. People like me should pay for it. And a lot of you are going to do really well, and you should too. That is why Priscilla and I started the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and committed our wealth to promoting equal opportunity. These are the values of our whole generation. It was never a question of if we were going to do this. The only question was when. Millennials are already one of the most charitable generations in history. In just 1 year, more than 3 in 4 US millennials donated to charity, and more than 7 in 10 raised money for another one. But it's not just about giving money. You can also give time. And I promise you, if you just take an hour or two a week, that's all it takes to give someone a hand and help them reach their potential. Now, maybe you're thinking, that's a lot of time. I'm not sure if I have that much time. I used to think that. You know, when Priscilla graduated from Harvard, she became a teacher. And before she'd do education work with me, she told me that I needed to get my own experience teaching a class. At first I complained. I said, you know, I'm kind of busy. I'm running this company. But she insisted. So I taught an after-school program at the local Boys and Girls Club on entrepreneurship. I taught those kids lessons on product development and marketing, and they taught me what it was like growing up feeling targeted for your race, and what it's like having a family member in prison. I shared stories of my time in school, and they shared their hope that one day they would get to go to college too. For 5 years, I've had dinner with those students every month. One of them even threw Priscilla and me our first baby shower. And next year, they're going to college. Every one of them, first generation in their families. We can all make time to give someone a hand. Let's give everyone the freedom to pursue purpose, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because when more people can turn their dreams into something great, we are all better for it. Purpose doesn't only come from work. The third way we can create a sense of purpose for everyone is by building community. And in our generation, when we say purpose for everyone, we mean everyone in the world. Now, quick show of hands. How many of you here are from another country? All right, now keep your hands up. How many of you are friends with one of these folks? Now we're talking. See, we have grown up connected. In a recent survey of millennials around the world, asking what most defines our identity, the most popular answer wasn't nationality, ethnicity, or religion. It was citizen of the world. That's a big deal. Every generation expands the circle of people we consider one of us. And in our generation, that now includes the whole world. We understand that the great arc of human history bends towards people coming together in ever greater numbers, from tribes to cities to nations, to achieve things that we could not on our own. We get that our greatest opportunities are now global. We can be the generation that ends poverty, that ends disease. And we get that our greatest challenges need global responses too. No country can fight climate change alone or prevent pandemics. Progress now requires coming together, not just as cities or nations, but also as a global community. But we live in an unstable time. There are people left behind by globalization across the whole world. And it's tough to care about people in other places when we don't first feel good about our lives here at home. There's pressure to turn inwards. This is the struggle of our time. The forces of freedom, openness, and global community against the forces of authoritarianism, isolationism, and nationalism. Forces for the flow of knowledge, trade, and immigration against those who would slow them down. This is not a battle of nations. It is a battle of ideas. There are people in every country for more global connection, and there are good people against it. And this isn't going to be decided at the UN either. It's going to happen at the local level when enough of us feel a sense of purpose and stability in our own lives that we can start to open up and care about everyone else too. And the best way to do that is to start building local communities right now. We all get a lot of meaning from our communities. Who here's from Elliott House? How about Lowell? I know you guys found community because you literally live right on top of each other. And Mather? I'll just leave that there. Whether our communities are houses or sports teams, churches or a cappella groups, they give us that sense that we are a part of something bigger, that we are not alone. They give us the strength to expand our horizons. And that's why it's so striking that over the past few decades, membership in all kinds of communities has declined by as much as 1/4. That's a lot of people who now need to find a sense of purpose somewhere else. But I know that we can rebuild these communities and start new ones because many of you already are. I met Agnes Segoye, who's graduating today. Agnes, where are you? Agnes spent her childhood navigating conflict zones with human trafficking in Uganda, and now she's trained thousands of law enforcement officials to keep communities safe. I met Kayla Oakley and Neha Jain. We're graduating today too. Stand up, guys. Kayla and Neha started a nonprofit that connects people suffering from chronic illnesses with people in their communities who are willing to help out. And I met David Razu Aznar, who's graduating from the Kennedy School today. David, stand up. David is a former city councilor who fought to make Mexico City the first Latin American city to pass marriage equality, even before San Francisco. And this is my story too. A student in a dorm, connecting one community at a time, and keeping at it until one day we can connect the whole world. Change starts local. Even global change starts small with people like us. In our generation, the struggle of whether we connect more, whether we achieve our greatest opportunities, comes down to this: your ability to build communities and create a world where every single person has a sense of purpose. Class of 2017, you are graduating into a world that needs purpose, and it's up to you to create it. Now, maybe you're asking yourself, can I really do this? Well, remember when I told you about that class I taught at the Boys and Girls Club? One day after class, I was talking to my students about going to college, and one of my top students raised his hand and said that he wasn't sure he could go to college because he's undocumented. He wasn't sure if they'd take him. Last year, I took him out to breakfast for his birthday, and I wanted to get him a gift, so I asked him what he wanted, and he just started talking about struggles that he saw other students in his class facing, and finally said, I'd really just like a book on social justice. I was blown away. Here is a young guy who has every reason to be cynical. He wasn't sure if the country he calls home, the only one he's known, was going to deny him his dream of going to college. But he wasn't feeling sorry for himself. He wasn't even thinking of himself. He has a greater sense of purpose, and he's going to bring people along with him. It says something about our situation today that I can't even say his name because I don't want to put him at risk. But if a high school senior who doesn't know what the future holds for him can do his part to move the world forward, then we owe it to the world to do our part too. So before you walk out those gates one last time, and as we sit here in front of Memorial Church, I'm reminded of a prayer, Misha Beirach, that I say whenever I face a big challenge, that I sing to my daughter, thinking of her future when I tuck her in at night. And it goes, "May the source of strength, bless the ones before us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing." I hope you find the courage to make your life a blessing. Congratulations, class of 2017. Good luck out there.
Welcome to How to Build the Future. Today our guest is Mark Zuckerberg. Mark, you've built one of the most influential companies in the history of the world, so we are especially excited that you are here.
I'm not sure where to go from there.
Well, why don't we start with just the early days of Facebook? Tell us what it was like when you started.
Sure. So, for me, the thing that I was really fascinated by, and it always have been, is people, right, and how people work. When I was in college, I studied psychology and computer science. And one of the things that you learn when you study psychology is that there are all these parts of the brain which are geared just towards understanding people, right? Understanding language, how to communicate with each other, understanding facial expressions, emotions, processing. Yet when I looked out at the internet, right, in 2004, which is when I was getting started, you can find almost anything else that you wanted, right? You could find news, movies, music, reference materials. But the thing that mattered the most to people, which was other people and like understanding what's going on with them, just wasn't there, right? And I think what was going on was that all that other content was just out there, able to be indexed by, search engines and other services. But in order to understand what's going on with people, you needed to build tools that made it so that they could express what was going on with themselves. I wanted to figure out what courses to take, so I built this little website, Course Match, that that just made it so that you could enter what courses you were taking, and you could click on them and see who else was in them, and it did all these correlations, so it told you people who took this course were likely to enjoy this course too. And the thing that just struck me from the beginning is people would just spend hours clicking through here are the courses that people are taking, and wow, isn't it interesting that this person is interested in these things? And it was just text, right? There was nothing that was like super interesting there, but that just struck me as people have this deep thirst to understand what's going on with those around them. And there were probably 10 other things like that I built when I was at Harvard before I actually got around to building the first version of Facebook that kind of added a lot of these things together.
Did you think Facebook was going to be a company when you started?
I built the first version of Facebook because it's something that my friends and I wanted to use at Harvard, a directory and a way to connect with the other people around us. And I didn't think at all that it was going to be a company. I remember very specifically the night that we launched the first version. I went out to get pizza with a couple of my friends who now work here, and and I remember really clearly we were talking about how one day we thought that someone was going to build a community like this for the world, and that would be some company, but it clearly wasn't going to be us. I mean, it wasn't even.
It didn't even occur.
Yeah, no, I mean, it wasn't even an option that we considered that it might be us. I mean, we just weren't focused on building a company back then. We were just building something that we thought would be useful at our school.
So as you look back, is there something that made Facebook different from the other projects that you had built that allowed it to turn into the company it is today?
Well, for one, I think we kept going, right? So I mean, the others, I mean, Course Match and just the other different crowdsource tools, they kind of served their purpose, and then we were done. Whereas with Facebook, there was just such, people loved it, right? And had such an intensity of using it. I think within a couple of weeks, 2/3 of students at Harvard were using it, and all these other students at MIT and other local universities were writing in asking us if we could open up Facebook at their school. So we kind of just followed that, right? And again, I didn't set out, and my roommates didn't set out to build a service that we were going to turn into a company, but we just kind of followed what people wanted, and that led us to expand it to all these other schools and eventually beyond schools, and to at some point. Once we'd hired a bunch of people, we decided to turn it into a company and go for this mission of connecting the world. But that's not where we started.
As you think about where you did start, is there other advice that comes to mind that you give to other people that want to build products that you can take away from the early days of Facebook?
Yeah, I always think that you should start with the problem that you're trying to solve in the world, and not start with deciding that you want to build a company. Right? I mean, the best companies that get built are things that are trying to drive some kind of social change, even if it's just local in one place. More than starting out because you want to make a bunch of money or have a lot of people working for you or build some company in some way. So, I always think that this is kind of a perverse thing about Silicon Valley in a way, which is that people decide often that they want to start a company before they even decide what they want to do. And that just feels really backwards to me. And, for anyone who's had the experience of actually building a company, that you go through some really hard things along the way. And I think part of what gets you through that is believing in what you're doing and knowing that what you're doing is really delivering a lot of value for people. And that's, I think, how the best companies end up getting made.
I want to talk for a second about low points, because I think people never appreciate how bad they really are. And I think it's always reassuring to hear that even Mark Zuckerberg went through some serious low points and came out okay. So can you tell us about some of the hardest parts in the early history of Facebook?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts for me was actually when Yahoo offered to buy the company for a lot of money. Because up until that point, that was the turning point in the company, where before that every day we'd just come in and kind of do what we thought was the right next thing to do, right? We'd open to more schools, we opened to high school and opened beyond schools, and launched more photos, because that's what seemed like the next thing that we needed to do to help people express themselves and understand more what was going on around them. But then Yahoo came in with this really meaningful offer, right? I mean, $1 billion for.
And this was how far into the company?
It was a couple of years in,
okay.
Right? And we had 10 million people using the product at the time, right? So it wasn't as if it were obvious that we were going to succeed far beyond that. And that was the first point where we really had to look at the future and say, wow, is what we're going to build going to actually be so much more meaningful for this? And that caused a lot of interesting conversations in the company and with our investors. And at the end of that, Dustin and I just decided, no, we think that we can actually go connect more than just the 10 million people who are in schools. We can go beyond that and have this really be a successful thing. And we decided to go for it. But that was really stressful because a lot of people really thought that we should sell the company. And and for a lot of folks who joined a startup, I feel like at that point I hadn't been very good about communicating that we were trying to go for this mission.
Yeah.
We just showed up every day and just kind of did what we thought was the right next thing to do. So for a lot of the folks who joined early on, they weren't really aligned with me, right? For them, they joined and being able to sell a company for $1 billion after a couple of years was like a home run, right? And it is a home run, right? And that's I think that's I get that, but that I think that the fact that I didn't communicate very well about what we were trying to do caused this huge tension. And the part that was painful wasn't turning down the offer. It was the fact that after that, huge amounts of the company quit because they didn't believe in what we were doing. Right? I mean, if you look at the management team that we had,
did that whole management team leave?
The whole management team was gone within about a year after that.
Did you ever regret that decision in that period? Like, were there times where you were like, well, we should have sold?
I got really lucky because, not only did what I believed in end up working out, but it ended up working out pretty quickly, right? So it literally, I think this was in the summer of 2006, and by, I think the next month after that, we launched Newsfeed, right? Which now 10 years later, looking back at it, is, one of the most used products in the world. And then we launched the ability for anyone to sign up, which immediately started growing the community. So within a few months after turning down the offer, I think it was actually pretty clear that it was the right decision. But I think since then there have been much harder decisions that we've had to make, where sometimes you have to bet on something and either bet the direction of the company or bet billions of dollars on something, and it's not going to be clear whether you're right for 5 or 10 years. And that I think actually can end up being much harder than this.
That's what I want to talk about next. But before we go there, have you ever thought about selling the company again since?
No, after that point.
I was just
got
that out of the way. We're going to hire people that want to be here for a long time.
Yeah.
Yes. So I want to talk about one of the most common questions we get from people building products is how to decide what to build, how to figure out when to bet the company, how to do something totally new.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that Facebook has done incredibly well is figure out what to build and build this repeated innovation culture, which I think is like the hardest thing to do in business. So how have you done that, and how do you advise other people to do the same?
I think the key is building a company which is focused on learning as quickly as possible. Right? Companies are learning organisms, and you can make decisions that either make it so that you learn faster or you learn slower. And in a lot of ways, building a company is like following the scientific method, right? You try a bunch of different hypotheses, and if you set up the experiments well, then you kind of learn what to do. And I think that's an important philosophy. So there are all these different decisions that we make inside the company, everything down to really empowering individual engineers. We invest in this huge testing framework, right? At any given point in time, there's not just one version of Facebook running in the world, right? There's probably tens of thousands of versions running because engineers here have the power to try out an idea and ship it to maybe 10,000 people or 100,000 people. And then they get a readout on how that version of what they did, whether it was a change to show better content in Newsfeed or a UI change or some new feature, they get a readout on how that version performed compared to the baseline version of Facebook that we have on everything that we care about, how connected people are, how much people are sharing, and how much they say that they're finding meaningful content, business metrics like how much revenue we make and engagement in the overall community. And by running tens of thousands of different experiments and putting the power in people's hands to try all these different things, you can imagine we just make so much more progress than we could if every change had to be approved by me, right? Or every idea had to come from management. So I do think that there's something very deep about building this learning culture and moving quickly towards that just helps you get ahead over time.
What about the bigger bets, like making a large acquisition or the rollout of Newsfeed or something like that? How do those decisions work?
So I actually think when you do stuff well, you shouldn't have to do big crazy things, right? So you want to actually evolve in a way where you're working with your community and making steps and learning. So take Newsfeed, for example. That was a relatively big shift, but it actually had been a couple of years in the making by watching how people were using the service, right? So, when we started off, we didn't have anything like newsfeed that showed you updates from what people were sharing. We just had profiles. And what we found were, originally one of the big behaviors was people would just click around, right? They'd click on different profiles, hundreds of them, and they'd go through all their friends to see what people had changed, right? To see what the update was in their friend's day. And we learned from that people were not just interested in looking up and learning about a person, but also understanding the day-to-day changes. So, first we made this product that just showed in order which of your friends had updated their profile, right? So that at least told you whose profile to click on. And then, the first version of Newsfeed was really simple. All it did was it basically took the content that people were posting and put it in order on your homepage. So I think when things are working well, you use data and you use the qualitative feedback that you're getting from listening to how your community is using your product to tell you what problems to go solve. And then you basically use intuition to figure out what the solutions to those problems might be. And then you test those hypotheses by rolling them out and getting more data and feedback on that. And then that gives you a sense of where to go. When I look at things like, we bought, the Oculus team for a lot of money, right? I actually view that as, if we'd done a better job of building up some of the expertise to do some of that stuff internally, then, maybe we wouldn't have had to do that. But, instead we hadn't done that. And, the Oculus team is by far the most talented team working on that problem. So it just made sense to go make this big move. But I actually kind of think as CEO, it's your job to not get into a position where you need to be doing these crazy things, right? And,
yes.
Of course it's inevitable, over the period of doing stuff, you can't be ahead of everything. So it's better to make big moves and be willing to do that than, have pride and not do that and never admit that you could have done something better in the past. But I think when stuff is working well, you're learning incrementally and growing that way.
Speaking of growing, one thing I heard you say years ago is that one of the best things Facebook had done was invent the idea of a growth group. And so this is something now that I've heard a lot of founders ask about. Could you tell us, is that still something you recommend people running companies put in place, and how Facebook's worked in the early days?
So making it so we could grow faster was, I think, the most important product feature that we ended up building for Facebook. And, the traditional approach to growing and marketing is, you have a communications group or you have a marketing team and you buy ads. And, I think that there's sometimes there's a place for that, especially when you're trying to communicate something and get a message out. But if you're actually trying to grow a product, I think often the best levers for doing that are within the product themselves, and getting people in your community who enjoy what you're doing to evangelize that to their friends and getting that to happen efficiently as possible. So, there's no magic in the growth group that we built that other people can't replicate. It's just being very rigorous with data, investing in data infrastructure, so that way you can process all these different experiments and learn what people are trying to tell you. And then go invest engineering and actually trying to grow the community, because I think that's the most important feature for a lot of networks.
And can you tell how much of an impact that group had on the growth rate of Facebook?
Yeah, I think it's, overall, I think it's been very big. I don't have a number off the top of my head, but I mean, even just looking at, some of these specific features that we've built, like people you may know, right? Which is, one of the important things, right? Again, if you're, a social product isn't that useful if you're not connected to other people when you're using it. So, helping you go from signing up for Facebook to connecting to the people that you care about most is probably one of the most important things that we can do.
Another thing that I think Facebook has done exceptionally well is hiring. And I always tell founders that this is the thing you have to get good at. So how have you hired your team, and what do you look for when you bring people on?
If you think about it, I started the company when I was 19, right? So I can't institutionally believe that experience is that important, right? Or else I would have a hard time reconciling, myself, right? And the company. So, we invest in people who we think are just really talented, even if they haven't done that thing before. And, that applies to people who are fresh out of university, as well as, people like, the CFO who took the company public, had not taken a company public before, right? And a lot of his background was in, production, development at Genentech before. So, just focus on really talented people.
And so if you don't have the experience to look for, how do you assess someone's raw talent?
Well, often you can tell from different things that they've done, right? So it's not that, obviously everyone's done something, right? I mean, even if you're 19, right, you've done side projects and interesting stuff, and I think what's important is not to believe that someone has to have specifically done the job that they're going to do in order to be able to do it well. One of the things that I think we've done well is just given the people at the company a lot of opportunity, right? So, it's not just me who started when I was 19 and now, I'm running this big company. There were a number of people who joined who were, people I did problem sets with at Harvard or dropped out of Stanford or, different programs who have grown with the company over this long period of time. And, one of the things that I'm the most proud of is we have about 12 different product groups in the company. And all of the people who are running them, with the exception of one, did not join the company running a product group or reporting to me.
That's amazing.
And the one exception is David Marcus, who was the CEO of a $50 billion public company. So, so I'm pretty happy that he's on board, and having him run a product group I think is a pretty big coup too. But literally none of them started off reporting to me. They all start off in different roles. Some were engineers, some were data analysts, some were product managers, and they've all grown. But I think what happens is, people see that you create opportunities for people, and that also, I think, keeps the best people engaged and makes the best people want to come work at your company because they feel like, oh, I'm going to get those kind of opportunities too.
Cool.
Yeah.
What are you most excited about over the next 20 years? What do you think will be the major transformations? How will Facebook transform? How do you think the rest of the world will transform?
So we have this 10-year roadmap.
That was great.
3 of the big changes that we want to see in the world. And we're focused on 3 things. Connectivity, right? So getting everyone in the world on the internet. Right now, more than half the world is not on the internet, which is, I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley probably take this for granted, right? The internet, because it just is not uniformly available. And if we want to solve a lot of the big challenges of the world today, they're not problems that any one group of people or even one country can solve, right? They really involve coming together and giving everyone an opportunity to participate in solving them. So I think connecting everyone is really a key thing, which is going to be great for people around the world. The next one is AI. I think that's just going to unlock so much potential in so many different domains. And we use it at Facebook for a lot of different things, for showing people content that they're going to find more meaningful, for making sure that you connect with the people you actually care about on the service. But in a lot of ways, the work that we're doing on AI to push the fundamental state-of-the-art forward is exactly the same stuff that's going into systems that diagnose diseases better, right? Or find better drugs to treat people, or that other companies are using when they build self-driving cars. And these are things that are going to save lives, right? I mean, if you can, I heard this story recently that at this conference where someone has built a machine learning application where you can take a picture of a lesion on someone's skin, and it can detect instantly whether it's skin cancer with the accuracy of the best dermatologists and doctors in the world. So, who doesn't want that, right? I mean, now, you're going to be able to put the power in your doctor's hand to become the best doctor in the world at that thing. Everyone will be the best doctor in the world. And that's a really fundamental thing, right? That, I get a little bit frustrated, I think, when people, fearmonger about AI and how it could end up hurting people, because I think in many real ways around diseases, around driving more safely, this is going to save people's lives and push people forward. So that's a really big deal, I think, for the next 10 years. And then, the next thing that I always think is going to make a big difference is, every 10 or 15 years, there's a new major computing platform that comes around that allows people to do completely different things than they could do before, right? So, 20 years ago, most of us were using desktop computers. They were kind of clunky. We used them in work because it made our work more productive, but most people didn't use them for fun. Now we have phones which help us connect with each other, and they're much more human devices, but there's going to be another platform after that. And I think that's going to be virtual reality and augmented reality. And that, I think, is just going to help people be more creative, experience what other people are feeling much more immersively than we even can through through video and things like that today. So I'm really excited about that trend as well.
So you were 19 when you started Facebook. One question we hear a lot at Y Combinator is, I'm 19 today. I really want to, do whatever I can to make the world better. What should I do? So how do you advise people who are 19 today and want to impact the world like you have?
I always think that the most important thing that entrepreneurs should do is pick something they care about, work on it, but don't actually commit to turning it into a company until it's working. And I think that if you look at the data of like the very best companies that have gotten built, I actually think a tremendous % of them have been built that way, and not from people who decided up front that they wanted to start a company, because you just get locked into some local minimum a lot of the time, a local maximum.
I totally agree. And just to make this point, how far into Facebook did it actually become a company?
I don't know. I think it became a formal Delaware company when Peter Thiel invested about 6 months in. When we were first talking to Peter about raising money, Dustin and I were very clear with him that we were planning on going back to school. Right? I mean, I started Facebook when I was a sophomore. We took the summer off, right? No classes over the summer. We were working on it. And then, our stated game plan was to go back to school in the fall and continue working on it then, but not like sit in an office and work on it full time. And Peter was just kind of like, all right, sure you are. I guess he knew better than we did.
You think he just believed that you weren't actually going to go back to school?
He must have. I mean, you'd have to ask him, but...
Yeah. I will. We're interviewing him in this series. I will
there you
ask
go.
that
So
question.
I think he would probably say that he knew that we were not going to go back to school, or believed that he could talk us out of it, but he didn't have to. It was pretty clear that the amount of work was just growing so quickly. But we actually didn't drop out immediately. We told Harvard that we were taking 1 semester off, and then we told Harvard that we were taking another semester off, and then a year off, and then after that we kind of decided we were going back.
Speaking of Peter, and sort of a closing question, what's the best piece of advice he ever gave you?
I think Peter was the person who told me this really pithy quote that in a world that's changing so quickly, the biggest risk you can take is not taking any risk. And I really think that that's true, right? I mean, a lot of people I think that, whenever you get yourself into a position where you have to make some big shift in direction or do something, there are always people are going to point to the downside risks of that decision. And locally, they're maybe right? I mean, for any given decision that you're going to make, there's upside and downside. But in aggregate, if you are stagnant and you don't make those changes, then I think you're guaranteed to fail, right? And not catch up. So to some degree, I think it's really right that over time, the biggest risk that you can take is to not take any risks.
That is a great place to leave it. Thank you very much.
All right.